The blackness of space stretched endless and silent, broken only by the slow glide of the Threxian armada. To most species, the sight of 200 alien warships moving together would have been a vision of death itself. Each ship was a fortress of jagged obsidian metal, forged in the heart of stars and sharpened by centuries of conquest. They were not explorers. They were not builders. They were hunters, an empire of predators that lived only to conquer and consume. For generations, the Threxians had spread through the galaxy like a plague. They would arrive in a system without warning, their weapons burning like suns, and leave behind silence, smoke, and broken worlds. They had devoured civilizations older and stronger than humans. They had erased voices that once sang across 1,000 stars, and each victory had taught them the same lesson. Nothing could stand against them. Now their shadow fell upon Sol, humanity's home. The Threxian commanders expected another easy hunt. Earth was young compared to the ancient empires they had destroyed. Humans were still climbing out of their cradle, still new to the stars. Their fleets were small. Their colonies were scattered. Their defenses, the Threxians believed, would crumble at the first strike. The armada moved past Neptune's orbit like wolves stalking sheep. Their sensors swept the system, cold and precise. They studied every moon, every planet, every fragment of rock. The aliens saw signs of industry, of expansion, of ambition. But to them it was only prey fattening itself for slaughter. In the flagship's command chamber, a silence of confidence filled the air. The High Commander, a scarred veteran named Varith, stood tall at the center platform. His 4 crimson eyes glowed with certainty. Around him, officers waited, claws tapping against their consoles. "Primitive world," one hissed. "Barely defended," another added. "Nothing they can show will matter," Varith concluded. They had spoken those same words countless times before, and every time they had been right. But then, something appeared. At first it was only a shape, an echo on the sensors, hidden near the orbit of Mars. The Threxian scanners adjusted, refocused, and sharpened the image. A single warship drifted in the darkness. No escorts, no fleet, alone. The officers laughed at first. One ship? They send only one? But as the image grew clearer, the laughter died. The human warship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was not elegant. Threxian warships, like those of most advanced empires, were designed to be sleek, sharp, and efficient, almost beautiful in their own terrifying way. They sliced through the void like spears, but the human ship, it was not a spear. It was a hammer. The vessel was vast and brutal, built of thick slabs of reinforced metal. Its surface bristled with cannons, missile bays, railgun turrets, and weapons the Threxians could not even identify. Every angle, every corner was designed for one purpose only: destruction. The Threxian bridge fell into silence. Sensors screamed warnings as they measured the warship's power. Energy cores pulsed within its heart, strong enough to rival their largest battleships. Weapon locks flickered across the armada, as if the human ship was already painting targets, daring them to move. One officer whispered, his voice shaking, It is not made to travel." Another leaned forward, claws trembling. "It is not made to explore." Varith's crimson eyes narrowed as the truth struck him. "It is made only to kill." In all their centuries of conquest, they had never seen such a design. Other species built ships to symbolize their pride, their artistry, their mastery of technology. Even in war there was elegance. But the humans had chosen something different. Their warship was not beautiful. It was terrifying. It was not a vessel of war. It was war itself, forged into steel. And the most disturbing part was its size. By mass, it was smaller than the Threxian dreadnoughts, barely larger than one of their heavy cruisers. But the readings showed firepower equal to ships 3 times its tonnage. It was dense, compact, every inch a weapon. Predators understood instinct. And what the Threxians felt in that moment was instinctive: fear. Varith's claws tightened on the railing. His officers avoided his gaze, though every one of them was thinking the same thing. If this was just one ship, how many more had humanity built? For the first time in countless years, the armada did not move forward. They did not fire. They did not rush to strike the prey. Instead, they hesitated. The humans had not spoken yet. The ship simply floated there, silent, waiting, its cannons turning slowly like the eyes of some ancient beast. And in the silence, the predators of the galaxy realized a truth that chilled them to their core. This was not prey. This was not fragile. This was a survivor's weapon. And survivors, they knew, were the most dangerous enemies of all. The Threxian fleet hung in space like a frozen storm. 200 warships, each carrying weapons strong enough to burn continents, and yet none of them moved. Their engines hummed quietly, their weapons locked but silent. Every eye, every sensor, every thought was fixed on one thing, the human warship. It was not moving fast. It did not need to. The great vessel drifted with steady purpose, turning ever so slightly, as though adjusting its aim. Each movement sent ripples of unease through the alien fleet. The humans had named it the UNS Retribution, though the Threxians did not yet know that. To them it was a shape in the dark, an iron beast that had no right to exist in this young system. The warship was ugly, but it was the kind of ugly that carried power. Its hull was covered in scars of plating, extra armor bolted and reinforced over old designs. The aliens saw no beauty, no elegance, no wasted curves. Instead, the ship looked like a mountain of weapons wrapped in steel. Dozens of massive cannons lined its sides. Missile bays opened and closed like the breathing of some great creature. Strange towers and spines jutted from its surface, each one humming with invisible energy. And then there were the railguns. The Threxians saw the magnetic coils glowing faintly along the ship's spine. They recognized the weapon type, but not at this scale. Their scanners reported the potential velocity of the projectiles, and for the first time some of the officers shivered. Those weapons could tear straight through a cruiser in one shot. The alien fleet began to whisper. Not with words, but with small signals exchanged between ships. Fear was spreading, though no one dared say it aloud. In the flagship's command chamber, the officers stared at their screens, their claws trembling as data poured in. "This design is madness," one officer muttered. "Why so many weapons?" "No ship can hold this much firepower," said another. "They built it for something else," a third whispered. High Commander Varith silenced them with a wave of his claw. His crimson eyes narrowed at the shape on the screen. It was small compared to their dreadnoughts, yes, but something about it was worse. The density of power, the sheer intent behind its creation, made it more terrifying than any vessel they had faced. Varith had fought 100 battles. He had seen warships from ancient empires long gone, vessels that carried elegance and pride. Some ships were designed like blades, others like arrows, swift and sharp. But this human ship was not a blade. It was not an arrow. It was a club. Heavy, brutal, final. Every piece of it screamed the same message. This ship was not built to win battles with grace. It was built to end them. The Threxians, for the first time, began to feel the weight of history pressing on them. They remembered the species they had conquered. How many of them had begged for mercy. How many had tried to fight with fragile fleets that broke like glass. Humanity, however, was different. They had not sent dozens of ships to meet the Armada. They had sent one, and the message was clear. One was enough. As the Retribution drifted closer, its shadow fell across the Threxian sensors like a storm cloud. Their scanners struggled to keep up with the overlapping layers of shielding and weaponry. There were systems they could not identify, strange energy signatures that hinted at weapons unknown to them. Every unanswered question only made the silence heavier. On one of the lower decks of the flagship, a young Threxian officer whispered the thought none of them wanted to voice. "It is not just a warship. It is a warning." Those words spread quietly, repeating among the crews of 200 ships. They felt it in their bones, though they tried to deny it. This ship was not built to patrol space. It was not built for defense alone. It had been made with purpose, made by a species that had known fear, that had known loss and had sworn never to know it again. The Threxians had always thought of themselves as predators. But staring at the Retribution, they began to feel what prey must feel. The cold touch of a hunter's eyes fixed on them. For the first time in generations, the predators hesitated. The warship did not broadcast words. It did not need to. Its very presence was a voice that spoke louder than any transmission. And the voice said, "We are here. We are ready. Come closer if you dare." The alien fleet froze. Weapons were armed, targeting systems locked, but none fired. They could not bring themselves to test it. Varith's claws dug into the railing, his chest heavy with something he had not felt since his earliest days as a soldier. He remembered once, long ago, being hunted by a beast on his homeworld, the way its eyes had followed him in the dark, the way his body had frozen even as his mind screamed to run. That was the feeling now. The Threxians were not used to doubt. They were not used to fear. But the shape in the dark had given them both, and deep in his mind, Varith understood something more dangerous than all the cannons pointed at them. The humans had built this warship not for conquest, not for pride, but for survival, and a species that builds ships like that to survive would never surrender and would never fall. Across the 200 warships of the Threxian armada, silence spread like a disease. Each crew sat frozen at their stations, their eyes locked on the human vessel drifting calmly ahead of them. The ship had no fear, no hesitation. It simply waited. The Threxians had never known hesitation. They were conquerors by birth. For centuries, their fleets had moved like blades through the galaxy, carving apart anything that resisted them. Whole species had burned under their fire. They were predators, born to hunt, born to kill, but predators know instinct. And every hunter knows the moment when they meet something too dangerous to fight. Whispers began to move across the alien fleet. They were not spoken aloud, but carried through hushed transmissions, private signals between officers. Fear could not be shown openly. It was shameful for a Threxian warrior to admit it. Yet still the whispers spread. This design, it is wrong. Not wrong. Terrifying. It is not built to live in space. It is built to destroy it. In the flagship, Commander Varith listened without turning his head. He could sense it even without the words. The steady drip of fear leaking into every corner of his fleet. His officers avoided his eyes, claws twitching against their consoles. Some tried to hide their unease with laughter, but their voices shook. The data streaming in from their sensors was worse than they had expected. The ship's main cannons were massive, larger than anything a vessel that size should have carried. Its missile silos were packed to capacity, but most disturbing of all were the unknowns. Dozens of strange energy signatures across the hull, each one a mystery, weapons they had never seen before. Every alien in that chamber knew what it meant. Humanity had not just copied designs from older empires. They had not simply followed the path of others. They had forged something new, something brutal, something honest. The retribution was not a symbol of pride. It was not built to look beautiful in the stars. It was raw, merciless function. Varith clenched his jaws. He understood the whispers, though he despised them. "Quiet," he growled. "Do not dishonor yourselves." But even as he spoke, his own thoughts betrayed him. For the first time in decades, the High Commander felt the old wound of fear reopen. The human ship was small, yes, but its readings told a different story. By firepower, it equaled a Threxian battleship 3 times its mass. Its shields were layered with redundancies. Its engines could move it faster than anything that heavy had a right to move. And worst of all, it had chosen to face them alone, 1 against 200. And still, the humans had sent it forward. It was arrogance, perhaps. Or maybe something worse. Maybe it was confidence. Another whisper reached the commander's ears from a junior officer. His voice shook, but he spoke the truth. Every surface is a weapon. The words echoed in the chamber. They all knew it was true. The ship bristled with death. Even the armor plates could double as kinetic shields. There was no wasted space, no weakness. The humans had built this vessel as if they had poured all their rage, all their history into steel. Some of the younger officers shivered as they stared at the design. They were too young to remember the old days before the Threxians had conquered half the galaxy. But even they could feel what their ancestors must have felt when they were the hunted, not the hunters. One of them dared to ask the question that none of the others wanted to face. If this is just one ship, how many more do they have? The chamber fell into silence again. Varith's claws dug into the armrest of his command throne. His mind raced. Could humanity have built a fleet of these? Was this ship a vanguard, or was it the only one? He wanted to believe it was alone. He wanted to believe it was a bluff. But deep inside, he knew survivors do not bluff. The whispers across the fleet grew louder. Fear was no longer hidden. It was becoming a tide that no commander could stop. Crew members spoke quietly to each other, asking if their shields could hold, if their cannons could pierce that armor. Engineers reviewed their battle plans with shaking hands. Some prayed to gods they had not spoken to in years. Predators, for the first time, were tasting their own medicine. In the endless void of space, silence pressed down like a weight. The retribution floated without words, its cannons glowing faintly, its presence filling the darkness. The Threxians realized something they had never admitted before. Warships were not just tools. They were messages, symbols. Most species built theirs to show beauty, to prove intelligence, to declare mastery over the stars. The Threxians had built theirs to dominate, to tear prey apart quickly. But humans had built theirs to endure, to survive the worst, to strike back at anything that dared threaten them. The whispers turned into a single truth that spread from ship to ship until it became undeniable. This is not a warship. This is a survivor's weapon. And as those words sank into the hearts of 200 alien captains, the fleet's claws wavered over the triggers. None of them wanted to be the first to fire. None of them wanted to test what the retribution would do when it finally answered. The alien fleet hung motionless in the dark. 200 warships, engines alive but hearts frozen. The whispers had spread, the fear had grown, and still the human vessel made no move. The UNS Retribution floated in silence. Its cannons pointed outward, its massive armor glowed faintly under the distant light of the sun, and its railguns tracked with patient, mechanical grace. The Threxians waited for an action, a sign, anything, but the ship just watched them. Then it happened. The silence was broken by a voice. It came without warning, cutting into every communication channel at once. The Threxians did not give permission, did not open frequencies, and yet the voice was there. Deep, clear, and calm, it filled every ship, every bridge, every ear. This is the United Nations ship Retribution. You are trespassing in soul space. Leave now, or be destroyed. The words were not shouted. They were not filled with rage. There was no anger, no pride, no cruelty in the tone. It was simple, cold, like a fact of nature being spoken aloud. The Threxians felt the silence after the message like a weight pressing on their chests. Predators were used to screams, to desperate begging, to threats made with fury. But this calm voice, it was worse than all of those. It was the voice of someone who was not afraid. On the flagship, Commander Vareth's crimson eyes narrowed. He sat stiff in his throne, claws digging into the steel arms. Around him, his officers exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "Their words carry no fear." Another added, trembling, "They did not threaten with pride. They spoke as if the destruction is already decided." The human voice echoed again, repeating the same warning. "Leave now, or be destroyed." And this time the Threxians understood the true danger. The humans were not bluffing. They were not negotiating. They were not posturing as other species often did before a battle. The voice had no hesitation because the decision had already been made. If the fleet moved forward, they would die. Vareth's jaws tightened. His kind did not back down. They were hunters. They had fought species with weapons that burned entire atmospheres, and they had triumphed. Fear was weakness, and weakness was death. Yet as he stared at the retribution, something inside him whispered the truth. This was not weakness. It was survival, and the humans were masters of survival. The junior officers trembled as the voice faded. One finally dared to speak, his voice almost breaking. "Commander, we cannot face it. We have never faced anything like this," another added quietly. "Look at them. They built this ship not for victory but for vengeance, for the memory of every threat they ever endured." The chamber grew heavy with those words. Even the proudest among them felt the weight. The voice had been short, only a few words. Yet those words carried centuries of meaning. The humans had said, "We know predators. We have met them before, and we built this ship so no predator will ever break us again." The fleet stirred. Captains whispered across private channels. Some wanted to attack, to test the humans, to prove that fear was a lie. Others begged restraint. Their claws hovered over their weapons, but their hearts pulled back. The calmness of the voice haunted them. It was not the roar of a beast. It was not the cry of a warrior. It was the tone of a survivor who had sharpened their pain into steel. Vareth looked once more at the retribution, and he saw the truth he could no longer deny. This was not prey. This was not another fragile species waiting to be crushed. This was humanity, standing at the mouth of their home, daring the predators to enter. He realized something else then, something more dangerous than the ship itself. If this was the way humans defended one system, what would they build to defend all the stars they would one day claim? The voice returned one last time, soft but final. This is your last warning. And then silence. The alien fleet sat frozen. 200 warships, more than enough to burn Earth to ash, and yet not a single one dared to move. In that silence, the Threxians felt something they had not known in generations. A choice: fight and die, or leave and live. For predators who had always believed themselves untouchable, that choice was the most terrifying thing of all. The alien fleet drifted in silence. The human warship floated before them, a dark mountain of weapons, its cannons ready, its voice still echoing in their minds. Leave now, or be destroyed. The Threxians had faced many enemies before. They had seen desperate fleets stand against them. They had heard countless voices cry out in anger, in pride, in terror, and always those voices had broken. The Threxians had destroyed civilizations so ancient their names were now forgotten. They had left entire galaxies quiet in their wake. But this was different. The calm voice of the humans did not beg. It did not rage. It simply declared a fact. And in that calmness, the Threxians felt something they had not felt in centuries: doubt. Varith, commander of the Armada, sat in his throne, staring at the Retribution. Its railguns glowed faintly, its hull bristling with weaponry. He could not take his eyes away. His officers shifted nervously, their claws scratching against the steel of their consoles. None spoke. None dared to. Because in the silence, old memories began to stir. Predators do not like to remember the times they were prey. But those memories live deep, hidden, waiting. The Threxians remembered their own past, their world before conquest, when they had not yet ruled the stars. They remembered the beasts that had hunted them in the wild forests of their home planet, creatures with eyes that glowed in the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike. They remembered freezing in fear when those eyes found them. They remembered running, desperate and breathless, and now, staring at the Retribution, that same ancient fear returned. This ship, one officer finally whispered, it is built from memory. Varith's crimson eyes flicked toward him, but he did not silence the words. Because he felt the truth in them. Humans, too, had been prey once. Fragile creatures on a small blue world, hunted by tooth and claw, by storm and famine, by enemies stronger than them. Every step in their history had been survival. And survival had taught them something that even the Threxians had forgotten. Never forget the predator. Every scar, every nightmare, every story passed down through their kind, humans had carried those memories forward. And then they had built this ship. The Retribution was not just steel, it was every monster humans had ever faced, every threat they had ever overcome, forged into one vessel. It was their answer to the universe. We will never be hunted again. The alien officers felt the weight of that realization. Their whispers grew, soft but sharp. They built it because they feared. They built it because they remembered. They built it because of us. The chamber fell quiet again. The truth was too heavy to deny. Varith's claws curled tightly against the armrest. His pride wanted to roar, to give the order to fire, to prove the Threxians were still the greatest hunters in the stars. But his instinct whispered the truth. This was not prey. This was something far worse, a survivor, and survivors do not forget. Survivors endure. Survivors fight with a fury that predators cannot match, because for them losing means extinction. The commander's mind twisted with memory. He remembered species that had resisted the Threxians before. They had been brave, yes, but their bravery had been fragile. They fought with desperation, not with certainty. The humans were different. Their calm voice, their terrible ship all spoke of certainty. This was not a race that feared death. This was a race that had lived with death for all of history, and learned to build around it. Varith finally spoke, his voice low, almost reluctant. They are not hunters. They are something worse. They are the hunted who survived. The officers shifted, uncomfortable. The words burned them with shame, but none could argue. Out in the void, the Retribution adjusted slightly. Its cannons moved slow and deliberate, tracking across the fleet. It was not rushing. It was not desperate. It was patient. Like a predator who knew the prey would move eventually. The alien fleet shuddered as one. None fired. None dared. The humans had shown them a new kind of power, not the power of overwhelming numbers, not the power of elegance or speed, but the power of survival itself. The power to endure, to remember, and to answer. The Threxians had always thought themselves eternal. But as they stared at the retribution, a terrible thought took root in their hearts. Maybe the galaxy would not remember them as predators. Maybe the galaxy would remember them as the first predators who learned to fear humanity. The void of space had never felt so heavy. 200 Threxian warships floated in formation, their weapons locked, their engines burning faintly. Across from them, the human warship UNS Retribution stood like an iron sentinel, its guns aimed, its presence unshaken. The moment stretched long and unbearable. Predators were not meant to hesitate. The Threxians were killers by nature, conquerors by instinct. For centuries, hesitation had been a word without meaning, but now hesitation was all they had. Every ship in the fleet had locked its weapons onto the human vessel. Railguns charged. Plasma cannons heated. Missiles stood ready in their tubes. A single command from High Commander Vareth, and the sky above Mars would light with fire. Yet the order did not come. Vareth sat in his throne, crimson eyes fixed on the human ship. His claws hovered above the console, the order for attack burning in his throat. But something stopped him, something no warrior of his kind ever wanted to admit. Fear. The calm human voice still echoed in his mind. Leave now, or be destroyed. It had not been a plea, not a cry of anger, not even a warning. It was simply the truth, spoken with certainty. And Vareth could not shake the weight of it. He glanced around at his officers. Their jaws were clenched, their eyes wide, their claws twitching against their stations. They were ready to fight, but their bodies betrayed them. They were not fearless. They were waiting. For him, for courage, for a decision he himself did not yet have the strength to make. This is wrong, one whispered, his voice breaking. We outnumber them 200 to 1. Yet I cannot. He stopped, his throat closing. Another officer hissed, shame thick in his tone. If we fire, they will fire back. And I feel it. I feel it in my bones. They will not miss. The chamber filled with a silence thicker than any battle cry. Across the fleet, captains whispered similar words to their crews. No one dared open fire. No one wanted to be the first to provoke the monster that floated before them, because the retribution was not a warship, it was judgment. The Threxians began to realize the trap they were in. Their nature told them to fight. Their pride told them to strike. But their instinct screamed the truth. If they attacked, they would not live to see victory. Vareth's mind raced. He thought of the countless prey they had slaughtered, the cries of dying species, the smoke rising from burning worlds. They had believed themselves unstoppable, eternal. Yet now one ship held them in place. One ship and one calm human voice. Why did they not fire first? An officer asked, his voice trembling. Vareth answered without thinking, his words heavy. Because they do not need to. That silence was more terrifying than any barrage of missiles. Other species shouted, screamed, raged before battle. The humans did not. They waited, patient and cold, because they knew the moment they struck it would end. And deep down, the Threxians knew it too. The silence stretched on. Seconds felt like hours. The hum of engines and the faint vibration of charged cannons filled every alien ear. Some closed their eyes, waiting for the storm of fire that never came. On the main screen, the Retribution adjusted slightly, one of its massive railguns shifting into perfect alignment with the Threxian flagship. That slow, deliberate movement made every heart in the chamber freeze. The meaning was clear. The humans knew exactly where to strike. Vareth's jaw tightened until he thought his teeth might break. He had been raised on pride, taught that fear was weakness, that hesitation was death. Yet now he saw the truth. Sometimes fear was not weakness, it was wisdom. He looked at the young officers around him, their crimson eyes wide, their bodies tense. They were waiting for him to command them into fire. But if he did, he would not only destroy them, he would destroy the future of their kind. He thought of his ancestors, hunted in the forests of their homeworld. He thought of the beasts that had stalked them, of the eyes that had frozen them in place. The Retribution carried that same gaze. Humanity had become the beast in the dark, and the Threxians were the ones frozen now. The silence before fire was worse than fire itself. Finally, Vareth spoke, his voice low, his pride breaking with every word. "If we strike, we die." The officers did not argue. They did not even look at him. They simply stared at the human ship, their fear answering for them. The truth was undeniable. The predators of the galaxy had found something greater than themselves, a survivor with teeth sharper than any hunter. And survivors, they realized, are the most dangerous enemies of all. The void was silent. The Threxian armada, 200 strong, predators of the stars, sat frozen before a single human warship. The UNS Retribution waited calmly, its cannons ready, its message still echoing in their minds. "Leave now, or be destroyed." High Commander Vareth sat in his throne, claws clenched tight, his crimson eyes locked on the monstrous vessel. His chest burned with shame. He was Threxian, bred for war, raised to conquer. His kind had never backed down. And yet every instinct screamed the truth. If they attacked, they would not live to tell of it. The silence dragged on. Seconds stretched into long minutes. Across the fleet, captains stared at their screens. Crews held their breath, weapons glowed hot and ready. But no one fired. No one wanted to be the first. On the flagship, a young officer whispered, voice shaking, "Commander, what are your orders?" Vareth's jaws locked. His pride wanted to roar. His honor demanded a strike. But deep inside he knew what must be done. To fight was death. To retreat was shame. But shame was better than extinction. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 1,000 ancestors pressing down on him. Then he spoke, each word like acid on his tongue. "Signal the fleet. Pull back." The officers froze. Some stared at him in shock. Others lowered their heads, relief breaking through their fear. None dared argue. "Commander," one officer whispered, "to retreat is dishonor." Vareth's crimson eyes snapped open, burning with fury. To die without purpose is worse. The command was given, and slowly, like a great beast wounded in its heart, the Threxian fleet began to turn. Their massive warships shifted, engines igniting, their sharp silhouettes breaking formation as they angled away from Seoul. The humans did not move. The Retribution remained where it was, its cannons tracking them, watching, silent. It did not chase. It did not speak again. It only waited, as if daring them to return. The withdrawal was not fast. The Threxians moved carefully, cautiously, like predators backing away from something greater than themselves. Each ship turned its engines outward, one by one, forming retreat vectors. Their FTL drives hummed as they prepared to jump away. In the alien flagship, silence filled the chamber. Officers lowered their gazes, some in shame, others in quiet relief. The younger soldiers looked at each other with wide eyes. They had just faced the most terrifying moment of their lives and survived, but they would never forget it. Vareth sat rigid in his throne, his body trembling though he tried to hide it. His pride bled inside him, but his survival whispered that he had made the only choice. Still, he could not stop the thought that burned like fire in his mind. We were 200, they were 1. And still, we fled. As the fleet prepared for the final jump, Vareth stared one last time at the Retribution. The monstrous ship floated against the black canvas of space, its railguns glowing faintly, its hull shining like iron in the starlight. It did not celebrate. It did not move. It simply existed, and that was worse, because victory without effort was the truest form of dominance. With a flash of light, the first Threxian ships jumped to faster than light speed, vanishing into streaks across the void. Others followed. One by one, the predators disappeared into the darkness they had come from. The flagship was the last to remain. Vareth lingered, his crimson eyes still locked on the human ship. His claws dug into the steel of his throne. His pride screamed at him to stay, to fire, to prove his strength. But his instinct whispered louder, "Leave. Live. Engage FTL," he ordered at last. The flagship shuddered, its engines roaring, its drive core igniting. The stars stretched into white lines, and then with a burst of light it was gone. The Sol system was silent again. The UNS Retribution remained where it was, alone in the dark, its weapons still ready, its engines calm. It did not celebrate. It did not need to. It had done what no one thought possible. It had made the galaxy's predators retreat. The Threxian flagship tore through the endless dark, its engines burning as it carried the last of the retreating fleet away from Sol. The stars stretched into long white lines, and the war drums in the hearts of the crew had gone silent. No cheers, no songs, no victory. For the first time in generations, the predators had fled. High Commander Vareth sat in his throne, his claws drumming against the steel, his crimson eyes staring into the blur of stars beyond the viewport. His body was still, but his mind was a storm. Every thought twisted around one image, that human warship. That iron monster named Retribution. He remembered the way it had floated, calm, silent, patient. It had not attacked. It had not taunted. It had only waited. And that silence was worse than any roar of rage. It had spoken once, one simple message, and it had been enough to turn 200 ships away. Vareth felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He was a commander who had seen countless battles, a warrior who had brought entire worlds to ash. Yet now he felt as if his heart had been pierced. His fleet had not been defeated in combat, but something deeper had happened. Something more dangerous. They had been defeated in spirit. The chamber around him was quiet. His officers worked at their stations, but none dared speak. The younger soldiers sat stiffly, their eyes wide, as though they still expected human fire to strike them even now, across the endless void. One officer finally whispered, his voice trembling, "Commander, what are they?" The question was not about humans as a species. It was not about numbers or weapons or technology. It was something deeper, something raw. The aliens had fought hundreds of races, and always the prey screamed, begged, or fought in blind rage. But humans had done none of these things. Vareth's throat tightened. He thought of Earth, a young world compared to others. He thought of humanity, fragile creatures of flesh and bone with lifespans shorter than the trees on Threxian homeworlds. And yet those fragile beings had built a warship like Retribution. He spoke slowly, each word heavy as iron. They are not hunters. They are survivors. The words sank into the silence of the chamber. Hunters fought for food, for dominance, for territory. But survivors fought for everything. They fought for their families, their homes, their very existence. And when a survivor fought, they did not stop. They did not forgive. They endured until the enemy broke. Vareth closed his eyes, and in his mind he saw the history of humanity written on that warship's hull. He saw prey animals hunted by predators, early tribes crushed by storms, ancient nations broken by war. Yet each time humans had stood again. Other species remembered victories. Humans remembered pain, and pain had shaped them into something terrifying. He realized then why the Retribution had been built. It was not a tool of conquest. It was not for pride or glory or dominance. It was a promise, a vow written in steel and fire. Never again. Humanity would never again bow to predators. They would never again be prey. And any who tried to make them kneel would meet the same silent answer the Threxians had faced. Another officer broke the silence, his voice unsteady. "Commander, will we face them again?" Vareth's claws tightened on his throne. His pride wanted to say no. His fear whispered yes. But deep inside he knew the truth. Yes, they would. The galaxy was vast, and sooner or later paths would cross again. He thought of his people, proud hunters of the stars. He thought of the arrogance that had carried them to Sol, expecting an easy kill. And he thought of the moment they froze, staring at that human warship, their instincts telling them what their pride would not. Run. "They will come for us one day," he said finally, his voice heavy, not as prey, not as hunters, but as survivors who do not forget. The younger soldiers trembled. Some looked away. Others stared at their commander, fear and respect mingling in their eyes. None dared speak. Vareth turned back to the viewport, watching the stars blur into white rivers. His chest ached with shame, but under that shame, a deeper feeling grew, something he had not felt in a long time. Dread. He whispered softly, almost to himself. "The galaxy does not understand what has awakened, but it will." The silence in the chamber grew heavier. Even the hum of the engines felt quiet, as if the ship itself listened. Vareth's last thought before he closed his eyes was a truth so sharp it cut deeper than any blade. Predators feared nothing. But tonight, for the first time, predators had feared humans, and the worst part was this: humans had not even tried.